Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.
Well, hello, and welcome to my Whiskey Den, your favorite public access whiskey review show where craft whiskey is king. And today we are doing something special in another evening with series, but today we are doing it with Scott Blackwell from Highwire Distilling down in Charleston, South Carolina. Thank you so much for being with us, Scott. We have tried some of your Jimmy Red Corn and some of your other products. We have found them lovely, but the passion that goes into producing them is something that we find the step above that usually creates why we would want to go to a distillery. And we just want to say thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it, Scott.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great intro. Appreciate that.
And thank you, everyone in the chat, for stopping in. I appreciate you doing that and being prompt and on time. I see Tim, Emily, Renita, who else? A couple other people out there. Thank you for stopping in and being on time. Ice House. What are you guys drinking out there? If you're lucky enough to be having some Highwire, what is it? Because at the end of the show, you're going to want some. So now, one thing I found pretty interesting, Scott, was you were a baker before you started, before you were a distiller, correct?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Among other things, I'll start with if you want me to go ahead.
No, by all means. I'll let you go. I got no problem with that.
So I've been in the food business pretty much my whole life, and I made so much that in college I made the statement of, when I get out of school, I'm never going to work in the food business again. I can't. I'm so sick of it. Because I was just doing lowly jobs and I was over it. And I've never done anything but food business. So, never say never. But yeah, so this is my first business was a pie business in college. And that was not really a business. It was more of like how you earn money cutting grass or whatever. It was just sort of, money. And then I realized that jobs were sort of hard to come by, especially jobs that you wanted. And then there was an opportunity with Ben and Jerry's ice cream that came along. So I brought Ben and Jerry's to the Carolinas. They were about 20 million in sales. And I'd seen a special with them on PBS, and I thought they looked cool, and I thought it sounded cool, and called up there. And next thing I knew, I was in Vermont, and handshake deal, and I was 21 years old, 22 years old, something like that. And I learned real quick what cash flow was like, or what it meant, what the definition. I'd heard the words, but when you have to buy a truckload of ice cream and pay for it in 2 weeks, it becomes real fast. So then I opened a restaurant in Columbia, and that's really where my baking kicked back in, because I was doing a lot of what I call like grab and go cookies, things like that. And then I got into the coffee business and started roasting coffee and opened a coffee shop in my basement there at the restaurant. And that was really where the light bulb went off, where I started relating agriculture to labor and sort of that terroir, if you will, where you could get coffee from the same region of Costa Rica from 4 different farms, the same variety, but completely different flavors. And that was really an awesome kind of learning experience. And then my manager bought the restaurant. It's in Columbia still. It's behind the State House, where I've been spending a lot of time lately. And
does he cut you special meals? Get a discount?
He is. I've never paid for a meal.
Okay.
I didn't realize that came with a deal, but I've got lifetime free food. I just need to move to Colombia. But no, he's a great guy, and he's owned it longer than I had it. But then I grew that business and sold the coffee business to a guy in Spartanburg who still owns that, and then that is where I met Ann. Ann was working for that coffee company. You guys were just speaking with my wife, Ann. I'm partner in life and business. And then we broke the bakery off and did dough. So it was place and bake, cookie dough, biscuits, cinnamon rolls. So if you go to any like Whole Foods, go to the refrigerated set, you'll see pie dough, biscuits, cinnamon rolls. We did all the private labels. So if you go to Trader Joe's, you'll see the private label biscuits, and we did all of that. And we took in venture capital about 4 years before we sold it, and we knew at that point, the writing was on the wall. When you take in venture capital, you're going to sell the company, and we were thinking about what was next. So I was brewing beer at the house. And it got pretty serious to the point where I was bringing home beer gear. I would sneak off and go buy stuff, and then Ann would go down in the basement. It's like, what's this extra refrigerator we have? How
long have you had that?
Yeah. Oh, Anyway, I was already thinking beer. Next business is beer, and there again, fermentations and stuff like that were interesting to me. And working with alt grains, we were working with sorghum with the bakery with a gluten-free line. I was working with rice, of course, wheat, and then kind of funky. I really liked not using flavorings. So everything was, from the real, like if it said lemon, had lemon in it. It didn't have lemon flavoring and stuff like that. So, that was just a common trend. And then Ann said, what do you think about us getting into distilling? Beer scares me. And I was like, I know nothing about distilling. And I've never distilled legally or illegally at that point. And to be honest, I thought it was kind of boring. I've seen it running off a still, and it's just clear, and it looks like, it's dribbling out, and it's kind of like watching water boil, which is basically what you're doing. And I thought, and when I went to a distillery up in Asheville, I was like, it was real quiet, and I was like, this looks boring to me, and is anybody making any money? And also how much flavor comes through, because it's just liquor, it's just alcohol, it's just, and what translates across and what really comes across. And that's sort of, and I'd always been really big on there again, flavor and that direct impact of start with a lemon taste, you get that fresh lemon flavor, or really good chocolate. It makes a big difference, and I just didn't know that from distilling, and I didn't know what I was getting into. So that's the history of how baking or food sort of influenced the beginning. And I can roll right in. If you want me to just keep talking, I'll keep on going.
If they want to jump in with questions, that's fine. But I'm pretty much going to ask a question that's going to lead to where you're going anyway. So I'm okay with it. It's not a big deal. But I like how I think like grains affected you before, and they continued to kind of influence like your flavor profiles. You always wanted that to come through. I just want people at home to just take that in as you go forward, because I think that's a really big thing from a lot of the people we've had on. They want flavors on one side to carry through to the other. And I would be scared like you were. A lot of people will distill that out. I mean, there's a lot of things that go away. That's what I would have been concerned about, before I started my trail or whatever with whiskey. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I think what also was growing up in South Carolina. I'm from Greenville, South Carolina. My wife Ann is from Orangeburg, and when I waited tables and all that, it was all mini bottles. We, behind the bar, we had many, so cocktails were not exactly exciting. You open up a mini bottle and pour it in and maybe squirt some cranberry juice off the gun in a glass, or you might get crazy and mix some orange juice and cranberry juice, and but you were still one mini bottle at a time, and unless you ordered something crappy like Long Island iced tea or something like that, and that cost you about, I don't know, $20 back in those days, maybe, which was a lot of money. I think also I would walk in liquor stores and they were just like cashing checks and people hanging around outside begging for money or whatever. It was not a glamorous thing. And craft beer, to me, I was, really early adopter of craft beer in the early 90s at my restaurant, and carried craft beer and hosted the home brew club at the restaurant once a month and visited craft breweries whenever I traveled, and I was very intrigued. And to me, it was like Budweiser, Coors. We drank a lot of Milwaukee's Best and Stroh's and Natty Light and whatever was cheap, basically. What was on sale, and you could drink like 15 of them, and so you didn't really. I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy them. You had to be really cold and you had to drink them fast, and it was more of a party, and I wasn't really what I would say I ended up, my first alcohol I really liked as far as liquor goes was gin, because it had flavor, and vodka was big, but I like gin, and whiskey was for old men. So it was just a different era, in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And, you've read, I'm sure, about the glut, and that's how we have all these old whiskeys now, because of that. Something good came out of that dark period for whiskey. So we knew enough to know we didn't know. So we hired Dave Pickerel to come work with us that first week when we had the still. This would have been in 2013 in June. Mm-hmm. We sold the former business, in December of 12. So it was a pretty quick transition. I begged Ann for us to just take like a year off and travel. And that didn't go over.
That would have been me too. I would have been like, let's take a trip.
And she looked at me about 3 years later and said, I think you were right. We should have done that. So Dave was, at that point, he was doing like crash course 101, running around the country, craft distilling. You buy this small barrel, you throw some stuff in it, away you go, release that in 2 or 3 years, and you're a craft distiller. And maybe buy some local corn or local wheat or whatever. Wasn't a whole lot of like what I would call deep thought at that point, that I wasn't getting major pearls of wisdom. And plus I was going through all the grains and fermentation and discussions around yeast and things like that. And he's like, you really know more than a lot of people getting into this because you've been around this stuff. But one piece of wisdom that I'm going to leave you with is you can't out maker's mark. And it was like, I knew what he was saying is those big guys were not like Budweiser and Coors. They make really good whiskey. So Maker's Mark and Four Roses and Wild Turkey, you're up against, they are bourbon, So, so we knew enough to say, if we just bought some local grain and, wasn't that special, what were we going to end up with, especially since it's just alcohol pouring off the still, they're again, not having a lot of knowledge around flavor. So that first fall, we being in Charleston thought, we're in a port city. People love rum in port cities. We're going to have rum. And we thought, let's do an agricole style rum from fresh cane juice. And a few guys around here are making syrup and stuff like that. And we talked to one of them up near Orangeburg. It was one of Ann's mom's friends. And he said, I've got some cane if you guys want to make rum out of that. And that was really where the light bulb went on. When we made that agricole that first fall in 13, we put it in, the fermentation was like, it was a wonderful smell. It was like bananas in the distillery. And when it came across, it was like, whoa, okay. You start with this really awesome, unique raw ingredient, comes across as this really unique spirit. And we had been making some whiskey. We made some whiskey with Dave with some heirloom white corn, and we played around with Carolina Gold Rice. And we also made some sorghum whiskey with some guys up out of Tennessee, Mennonite family. And you could taste that stuff blind, White Dog wise, and there was no question from White Dog to White Dog. You could, there was a lot of flavor in that clear, boring stuff that came off the still. It proved me wrong, which I was happy. I was like, wow, okay, we can really maybe get flavor. And so that was sort of where the quest for who are we going to be at that point. And we knew sorghum was a spirit specialty or something like that category. Agricole, the French, the Martinique and those guys, they make so much of it. How are we, we only harvest cane here, and it was like, we could make a couple hundred bottles, a bag, it was like, we're not going to make a living doing this. So we knew ultimately that we really needed to be thinking about traditional American whiskey. And what is that? It's bourbon and rye. And how are we going to fit in that puzzle? So
now, when you mentioned Dave, this is a picture of him signing your first barrel. Now, was that during kind of his like kind of first stop through, or did he come back later on and kind of come through a couple times to sign some of the barrels that you're going through? Was that just kind of the first time?
That was it.
That was it?
Blisteringly fast. I mean, he was a wild man, for one thing. I don't know if you met him. That was a week. I mean, we spent 14 hours a day together, and we drank a lot of whiskey at night, and he played hard. So that week, we didn't have barrels. We had some used barrels, but I didn't know what kind of barrels to buy. At that point, there was a barrel shortage in 13. There were big, large barrels, 53s. Yep. You had to pay like $500 for them if you wanted them, and people were buying them from overseas, and it was out of control. So he said, "Oh, I got it. Don't worry. I'm going to call this guy." And he calls this guy. He says, "Hey, we need a 10-gallon barrel. FedEx it and have it." So that barrel you saw in the photo, we bought one, and he had it shipped in overnight so we could put some of this heirloom white corn in it. And he said, "Yeah, put that in the barrel, put it in the back for 4 years, and pull it out. It'll taste great." We tried it after about 6 months, and it tasted like pencil shavings. It was so over-oaked. It was pretty horrible. Yeah. So, and there again, it was a crazy period because it was like a crazy rush at that point for craft distilling. I think when Ann and I went out to Portland, Oregon in 2011, 2012 to visit distilleries, and we met Christian Krogstad from House Spirits. And I think it was like 200 distilleries at that point, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then in 15, it was like 1,700 or something. It was so you couldn't get equipment, it was, and there again, there was this barrel shortage, and even the big boys were fighting that one. So, and in the meantime, I'm laying awake at night trying to figure out, did we make a mistake? How do we fit in this business exactly? And like I say, I mentioned corn, and I knew enough to know that I didn't really know enough about. I knew, growing up in the land of grits. Of course, I've eaten a lot of, stone ground grits and heard a lot of talks about stone ground and stuff, but I really didn't know the varieties, and even being around it, I knew there was, kind of commodity, and there's like Quaker grits, and then there's like good grits, but not really, it's kind of not really. There was no real deep dive in my life around corn, and Ann and I were like, we want to make bourbon. How do we fit into bourbon? And in those, we still hear it. The flavoring grain is wheat or rye. Do you put wheat or do you put rye? What's your flavoring grain? That's the number one thing. And it's like, well, what is the 70+% corn? Does that not have flavor? And that was sort of where we started to ask questions. And I said, it's got to be like mushrooms or tomatoes. Different varieties going to have different flavors. Mm-hmm. We've seen it with this agricole. We've seen it with this sorghum. We were using this white corn. I think it was just more availability, and it wasn't like a lot of thought, to be honest, going into that. It just sounded kind of cool. It was heirloom, and we hit up a guy named Glen Roberts who owns Anson Mills, and there he is. Yes, he has Anson Mills in Columbia, South Carolina, and he is like a corn guru, rice, really any kind of grain. And we're lucky enough to have him right here in our backyard. And he and Dr. David Shields were, down here in Charleston a lot working with chefs. And we got Glenn on the phone, and he said, well, you want to learn about corn? Meet me this Thursday down at Clemson. This is how Glenn rolls. It's like sort of catch him when you catch him. And I drove down. Ann couldn't go that day, so I drove down to Clemson, which is, like 20 minutes down the road here on 17. And get there, and he's got this whole table full of seeds, and he's going through all the different corns. This is John Hawk. This is Pencil Cobb. This will taste like this. This will taste like that. I realize Glenn has really never distilled, but he, is telling me about the flavors and what's going to happen with them. And this is, one of the things, he's like a mad scientist. One of the things I love about him, a lot of energy, telling you more than you can even sort of retain. And at the end, I'm looking at this corn in the middle, and it's red, and I'm like, what's that one? He's like, oh yeah, that's James Island Red. That's the one you want. And I'm like, oh, 20 minutes later, here we are. And he goes, yeah, it's a great corn. It's going to make great whiskey. I was like, awesome. I'd love to try it. And I'm thinking, how much, do you have any that we can buy? And he was like, how much do you need? I said, 800 to 1,000 pounds for a batch. And he was like, you guys are grain hogs. And he is very like, He's used to selling to chefs. He's used to selling to bakers. These things were like, 10-pound bags or whatever, and here we are. Oh, we just needed 1,000 pounds, for one batch, and I'm sure he's like, that's a waste, and he's like, well, but also it doesn't exist. There's not 1,000 pounds out there available. Because I'll tell you what, though, I'll give you the seed, and Dr. Brian Ward will potentially agree to grow it for you guys as an experiment. And you're going to have to write a check, and I mean a big one, to Clemson to make this happen. And I was like, and I could tell he was testing how serious were we? Mm-hmm. And I said, great, yeah, we'll write a damn check. We're past the 10 minutes, so I think I can say that now.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like, yeah, we'll write a check. Yeah. And I'm thinking, I don't have a clue. We went over budget. We opened up 3 months late. Ann's going to kill me. And I get back to the distillery, and she goes, what do you find out? And I said, well, he's got this red corn. I've agreed to grow it. He says we're going to have to write a big check. And she goes, how much? And I said, I have no idea. We got to do this. I feel like we're, I hate to say it, we're kind of desperate. Right. We need an idea here. We need something that's going to be our thing. And the corn looks cool, but does it taste cool? And there again, I'm a city guy. I grew up around food, but like many of us, it came in a box or a package. Even from the farmer's market, I bought a box of tomatoes or a box of mushrooms. I didn't go to a farm and help cut it or pick it or whatever. And so I was fascinated by corn and how it grew and just the whole sort of science of it. So I went out to Clemson every week, and I would often forget my shoes and be in my flip-flops running behind the tractor trying to take pictures and ultimately stand in a fire ant bed or whatever. So I earned my stripes as a farmer that first year. But we put it in the ground in I think April, and we harvested it that September. That photo you showed was of Glen. Yep. We couldn't get in the field with a tractor because it had been raining for 20 days. And so it was extremely muddy. And so we went in, we called up a bunch of chef friends, and it was just like we supplied breakfast, and that was, probably 9 in the morning or so. And we fed everybody, and we had a blast, and we harvested that 2 acres. And I think we got, 3,800 pounds or so. And we kept some for seed, and then we mashed the rest. And we knew the day we mashed it, it was definitely a different flavor than the heirloom white or yellows we had worked with. That was the extent of our experience with corn. And then when it fermented, we noticed that it had this really thick oil cap that we had not seen on these other. So that's actually a photo as it's being pumped out, and that's the remainder of the oil. But there was a good 3-inch oil cap consistently on this stuff, and it was like you'd put your finger in it, and it, to me, smelled like peanut butter or marzipan, sort of. And it's definitely got some like fruit notes to it. Ann says banana. Laffy Taffy is what she compares it to, which I guess is not really a fruit. And then we, when it came off the still, we noticed the viscosity and this other flavors going on in the distillate, and we got really excited and said, we should have grown more, and written a bigger check. No, so that's sort of where we were off to the races. And at that point, there's a guy named Wayne Curtis. You guys may know of him. He's a writer, and he came to the distillery and tried it. I was basically trying to get anybody who would be willing to taste it at that point to try it and just tell me their thoughts. And he said, I said, do you think we ought to add wheat or rye to this? We've done 100% corn. And he said, I would just do 100% corn. It's really, there's a lot going on. And I think he goes, I would usually say, yeah, maybe put some rye or some wheat in it. But he's like, I think you should just leave it alone. And so for those first couple of barrels, that's what we did. And then, and then I had some doubt, and we made some wheat and some rye. And to be honest, we've tasted it. We've still got it. It's about 5 years old. Mm-hmm. And it's not as dynamic, so, there again, flavor and grain, mm-hmm. And so, anyway, I'll pause there. You might have a question.
No, I know when I opened mine, I smelled just a distinct difference of flavor from the corn. I mean, it was powerful, and it was different, and it was bold, and closest I had was probably the Bloody Butcher corn at that point to the Jimmy Red. And you could tell that for me, this had like a thicker viscosity. When I first had it, it just had such a unique mouthfeel. I really liked it. I'll let Ben and Mike talk though. They haven't said much. They've been pretty quiet over there.
I've been enjoying listening to this, but two questions. One, I was curious if you had ever experimented with with not doing 100% of the Jimmy Red, which you'd said that it just wasn't the same. But actually, I'll say 3 questions. That first barrel, do you still have it?
No, shit, no.
Okay.
No. We still have the barrel, the wooden barrel. It's in our tasting room, with all the signatures on it. That we'll always have that because it's, barrel number 1. And it's also like a reminder of we will never do that again.
Wait, did you ever try it? Did it ever get any better at all, or is it was just not good?
No, it was not good. It was dark. It had a lot of great color and smelled like bourbon, but you couldn't. We played around with a lot of small barrels because there again we couldn't get larger barrels. And Dave, and I even asked Dave, I'm like, what's the difference between like 10 and 15 and 30? And, and he was like, not really much of a difference. And I'm like, and to his credit, between the 10 and 15, there wasn't, but the 30 to me gave a little bit more time, but not much. We at one point when we did the Jimmy Red, barrels were still about $500, and I said, Ann, I think we're just gonna have to pony up. And I said, we can't put this stuff in a small barrel, and so we ended up buying, I think, 12 $500 barrels. It was like either we'll have bourbon a few years down the road or we won't. And, that's the price, we're just going to have to suck it up. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't want to be in this business and be cutting corners, and knowing better and not doing better, and that was sort of the thing that, we Wayne Curtis and Lance Winters from St. George, and maybe I'm trying to think, was it Tales of the Cocktail? I went to see a panel and they showed a chart of what happens in barrels. And Buffalo Trace has their experimental series they do, and they had done a bunch of work with small barrels. And, I hated it because I would love to cheat time and
Yeah.
It just was not working for us. Now, granted, we're also our not rick house, because it was just basically in the distillery. We only had 6,500 square feet at that point. And the barrels were in the production area, and it was 110 degrees in summertime and 95% humidity. So that's our tasting room, and you can see the barrels back there through that window. You're basically seeing the entire tasting room there. It was a small room, and then most of the space was dedicated to the production area, which was about 4,000 square feet. But it cooks a barrel. So if you're in Minnesota or somewhere and you're 15-gallon barrel, or what, maybe it might work. I'm not poo-pooing the whole idea. I'm just saying, in Charleston, no bueno. Tropical climate we have here.
I figured you'd be losing about 7 to 10% a year with something like that down there in your climate. So
we lose an average of 7%. And we also see the proof go down at first, and then it goes back up. We played around with barrel entry proof. I found a study on the effects of water and alcohol from UC Davis, and as it relates to wine, but also there was one on spirits, and I paid for that white paper, and it was one of the best $10 I ever spent. But it was a 5-page, basically there again, kind of what happens when water is in contact with wood versus, alcohol. Because ultimately wood is an ingredient. You're macerating. So that wood is very important. It's not just a barrel. That barrel selection is extremely important. And, you already know the effects of French wood versus American wood, versus Hungarian, versus Japanese. You're going to get different flavors out of that wood, but also how that barrel is cured and the barrel entry proof. And so originally, Dave, we put that small barrel at 125 proof. And it was just way, way, way overly aggressive. So we quickly moved to 115 proof, and then we since have moved down between 105 and 110. And we've seen a remarkable difference. And our peach brandy and agricole will typically age at 100 proof. And we're playing around with some stuff there. There's a lot more to learn. I mean, we will never stop learning. It's just I realize now that it's not boring at all.
So are you baking with your grains at all?
No. We made some cornbread, but I bake now for pleasure, and there you go. Yeah. That's how it looks when it comes out of the hammer mill, and it's kind of a coarse meal, if you will. You'll get kind of a blend, and the pericarp and everything are in there. And when you add water to that, it's a deep magenta color, which is really cool. But there's a ton of oil. You could take that and grab it and hold it like this, and it clumps. And there again, that's where you get this viscosity. The other thing that a reviewer, always no offense to any reviewers out there, but they'll say, oh, they're getting cinnamon from this, or they'll get this from that. And I'm like, not really. The cinnamon in that whiskey is actually in the corn. So when you're tasting the White Dog, when it's coming off the still, there's a spice flavor. I'm not talking peppery. I'm talking like baking spice, cinnamon. And there are barrels, like we were tasting through some barrels today, and you'll open it up, and there again, our references all go back to candy because we're children. But it's like big red chewing gum. you know, and that's like our reference. You'll get these cinnamon bombs at the distillery, and Lance Winters at one point referred to it as cinnamon donuts because of the combo of that yeast or that cinnamon roll flavor. And it didn't dawn on us at first, but now you taste the White Dog, and as it's coming off the still, you're like, oh wow! And it's because there's a compound called cinnamic acid that's in Jimmy Red, and it's not in yellow corn, and it's not in white corn. It might be in Bloody Butcher. I've never looked at it. Bloody Butcher is definitely like a cousin, of course. One thing I learned, or that we've all learned, I say we as in collective of our corn nerd club, we learned a lot about sort of migration of corn and how it got to the Southeast. And there were some questions in my mind around these unique varieties and where corn came from. And that led to a discussion with Glen, and he said, well, it's from this grass called teosinte. And there's 5 varieties of teosinte. They grow in Mesoamerica or Mexico. Mm-hmm. And we ended up getting some of that because I'm like, well, I wonder what flavor is in what flavor is in teosinte, and we ended up distilling some, and it doesn't necessarily taste like corn so much. It tastes more like a rye, but it is a grass, and then as we started to look into that, there were these 59 unique varieties of corn in the world. And I'm like, no, there's thousands. It's like, no, there are thousands of mutts, basically. I mean, yep. So you've got, and the easiest way to explain it is you've got 59 like pure families out there, and then they intermarry, and then, then you've got blonde-headed, blue-eyed, and brown hair. You've got all the different kids, and grandkids that spawn off of that, and so that's ultimately where we had more questions. So those photos you threw up were actually in Mexico. Yep. We went down with Glenn and some geneticists to Mexico City originally, and ended up at Simmet, which is the Maize and Wheat Research Center in Texcoco, and ended up basically visiting seed banks that they have there, and we met the Magos de Mayas.
Hold on, I got to get that seed bank picture up because that was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, so there you go. A lot more than 59 there. So it really, the first couple of days were just more questions than answers. But the exotic, I'm sure you guys have seen some exotic photos of corn, but we were just curious about what else. Jimmy Red's awesome, but what else out there is what makes it awesome, and what else out there could be more awesome or as awesome as Jimmy Red. So we were distilling. I have a little 10-gallon still, and we were distilling like, I don't know, a couple of corns a week probably. And I was doing what Glenn calls a culinary test, where I'll make a porridge. I'll grind up some meal and then cup it more like coffee, and taste the raw corn when it's warm, and then again when it's cold. And it's funny because like yellow corn is super sweet and mainly just sweet, not a lot else going on, but then bitter on the back end. And I was like, oh, you know what? That's actually what I've tasted in some of our distillate. And so it really taught me that, in that raw form, you could really tell a lot about what it was going to end up tasting like in the distillate. You get it's a finger in the wind. So that trip ended up taking us to Oaxaca, where there are 38 of the unique varieties are from. And that basket you showed,
Yep.
Ann and I were thinking, wouldn't it be really cool if we could find like the ancestor of Bloody Butcher, Jimmy Red, these southeastern dents. And both of us sort of stumbled on this basket at the same time because he had it grouped by families. And that's a great example of what I'm talking about. Those are all the same family. And if you saw the basket next to it, it's going to be completely different and maybe 8 rows or whatever. But this one had like 12 to 14 rows, similar cob shape, kernel shape, kind of a flinty dent. It's called Tuxpano, and it grows down in southern Oaxaca below 1,000 feet. And we were like, oh, wow, that's, this could be the most similar to what we're dealing with Jimmy Red. So we said, is any of this available? And the guy who was running the outpost, it's like a USDA thing called NFAP. And he said, well, that's where I'm from, and I could grow some of that for you. So we were like, cool, let's do that. So long story short, this was all this would have been January, planted in that May. And then Ann and that group that you threw up that photo with all of us there, we were in that hill that we were on.
Yep.
That is the result of that. So we planted about 2 acres there again of Rojo Tuxpano, so red Tuxpano, and you see the slope there. And there you go. There's the red Tuxpano. So looks very similar to Bloody Butcher and Jimmy Red. So we just got that back last October. Finally, it took us a while with COVID, and distilled it. And sure enough, it's very similar but different. And we're growing some more out this year down there with the same. The farms down there are indigenous people, so the seeds are sacred, and you would never take them out of those areas. So they're growing it. It's sort of our version of fair trade, if you will. Buying that corn from them. We won't bring seed up here and plant it. This is strictly just R&D to learn and to understand kind of what we're working with here. In parallel, and there again, I'm getting super deep, and you can just sort of
no, go down the hole.
This is what we like here.
Yes.
Yeah. So in parallel, Glenn was panicking because he goes, you keep pulling seed out of the field and throwing it back in, and it's going to drift because it's an open pollinated corn. So open pollinated means you've got a tassel that forms all your pollen, and you've got the silks, which are sticky, and each silk is representative of a kernel. So if you see a corn cob and it's got one yellow kernel and the rest is red, a yellow corn is crossed, or it's a latent genetic trait or whatever that's popping up there. But most likely it's crossed up. Well, you keep, even by color, if you're just pulling cobs out and going, ooh, that's pretty red, let's save that. Let's put that back in the ground. And you're not looking at cob shape and cob length and things like that. And you just keep throwing it back in the ground. About 4 or 5 years later, you're going to have drifted away from that variety, more or less, that really cool mutt you liked, that Dotson with a Labrador head or whatever, you're gonna, it's gonna end up looking like a Doberman Pinscher or something. So ultimately you're trying to kind of control that drift. So it's going to be more of a weavy line as opposed to a complete curve. So what dawned on us was doing genetic work and doing gas chromatography and things like that with Clemson's help, and also getting what they call like a phenotype, so a fingerprint, if you will. And in my nerdy sort of quest, I said, wouldn't it be cool if we can get the phenotype of Tuxpano red and overlay that genetic and just see how much of it matches up. And if you overlay a Bloody Butcher, you're going to also see there some similarities, but they're going to be different. And the problem that I've seen with Bloody Butcher is it's very prolific. I mean, if you can order seeds. A ton of people have it. And I can tell you, if you ordered seeds from, say, 10 seed banks, you're going to ultimately have 10 different corns. So that therein lies, to me, the problem, in that they're going to be subtle, but you're going to have 10 different flavors. And as you go and you put that seed back in the ground, if you're not selecting and very careful with that, you're going to see drifts. And, this Bloody Butcher that's grown in Iowa is going to be very different. And I think terroir does affect that as well, and sort of that landrace quality and sort of survival of the fittest. So you're going to see flavor changes. So we felt like, as a steward, we had been entrusted with this really cool corn, and also we like the flavor of it. So we do what's called controlled grow outs now. So we pay geneticists, and I wish I'd sent you a photo of this, but they bag the tassels and then bag the silks, and then you shake the bag with a pan, you get the pollen, and you hand brush the pollen onto the silks and rebag. And then you do that for your seed production, or you grow it in a hoop house or something, some sort of contained, controlled environment. And ultimately, we do that year over year. So we own our own seed. It's not a Monsanto kind of thing. It's just more of a flavor preservation thing.
Yeah,
and
I get
also,
that. Keeps it tight.
Yeah, and so Ted Tuning, who I think I sent you a photo of, was the guy.
He's in here.
Yeah, so that guy is the one that basically got the 2 cobs of Jimmy Red, the famous story that the family gave him the 2 cobs. The patriarch of the family had died. The corn was in the field, and the kids may or may not have not wanted to continue to do something that the father was doing that was not, we can't talk about. So those 2 cobs were given to Ted to basically preserve. And Ted quietly grew this. And Ted's he's just a curious guy and loves playing around with, just different grains. And he ended up growing this stuff quietly for 17 years until Glen found him and said, what's this corn you've got? And then he entrusted Chef Sean Brock, who was here in Charleston at that point, and us with that. And we ended up, we grow. The thing that we realized is that we went from that 2 acres to this last year we grew 300 acres. And we harvested about 700,000 pounds. This year we're planting in hopes that we'll harvest somewhere around 850,000 pounds. When you're doing that, the stakes are fairly high, and that's why that seed preservation was extremely important. And then also, like I say, that understanding of the, sort of where this corn came from, and understanding kind of what else might be out there. We've played around with blue corns. We've played around with other white corns, other red corns. And Jimmy Red is always kind of our control. And, there's some blue corns that we played around with that I really thought were similar in uniqueness and interesting flavor, but we're pretty happy with what with the Jimmy Red. It's not like we're settled, but it's just that.
Yeah.
So what's all your experiments that you're doing with all these different corns? Are you ever going to have like kind of special end releases? Like, are they in smaller barrels? But will they be like a distillery release at some point if you don't have a lot of it? It was like a test one that went well.
All the test like super 10-gallon things are just White Dog. Yeah, we have bottles, we have all that. We have a library of White Dog basically. It's really difficult to produce a 53-gallon barrel. You got to start with like 500 gallons of mash. So it's there that 800 to 1,000 pounds of grain. And a lot of these there wasn't even that amount in existence. So we did some blue corn from Oaxaca a little over 3 years ago. And when we fermented it and when we mashed it, it was in the mash tun, and I called our distiller over and I said, "What do you taste?" And he was like, tried some, and he was like, "Blueberries." And I'm like, I didn't know if it was my brain telling me that, but it was like blueberry. And it was this earthy, how blueberries have this earthier, like true blueberries have not like Pop-Tart, but I'm talking real blueberry, have this earthy flavor. Yep. And there's a bit of a cooling effect, I think, like with acai and things like that. And so I couldn't get it out of my head, and I looked it up, and anthocyanine is the color blue. So it's in wine, grapes, it's in, acai, it's, anything blue, probably blue potatoes, et cetera, et cetera. So when we noticed that Jimmy Red had a lot of like purple blue tints, and a lot of the kernels are dark blue. So Clemson ran an anthocyanine level on it, and the blue, of course, was like, here, and then the Jimmy Red was like 60%. But it told us that there was that and I asked the geneticist, I said, I would really love to do a chart of like yellow corn, white corn, blue corn, red corn with these types of things, all these compounds. And we're on a conference call, and one of the geneticists says to the other one, he says, well, Jim, what do you think, how much would anthocyanine with the yellow have? And he goes, well, none. And like, duh. And it was like, yeah, we're not talking to scientists here. We're talking to like whiskey people, so I know that seems obvious to you, but like to me, that's like a find. I feel like, Hiram or whatever. I've just discovered Machu Picchu here, So anyway, we ended up figuring out that there were a lot of cool things in Jimmy Red that, we were finding, like I say, in other varieties, but none of them had all of the things. But this blue corn, we had a wine writer in who's named John Bonet, and he was at San Francisco Chronicle back then, and he came in and he was tasting through, and he's swirling the glass like a wine guy, real, kind of furiously or whatever, and I pour him some of the blue White Dog, and he's like, yeah, that was it. He goes, and he sticks his nose in, and he goes, anthocyanine, and I was like, are you kidding? And it's like, you can smell that, So it was like, it just, there again, this is like been like cementing this thing that these things all are ultimate contributors of flavor. And what dawned on, there again, thinking back to that pre-high wire, walking into those dirty liquor stores, was that every bottle in there, when you look at it, is a representation of agriculture. And I'd say 98% of what's in that liquor store, besides sugar and food coloring, is agriculture. And it's like big ag. So you think about it like McDonald's hamburger, or one that you did this special blend of meats and hand patty grilled over hickory wood or whatever it is. And yes, it's a hamburger, but totally different outcome. So that's sort of where we were like, okay, we aren't Maker's Mark. We're you know, Maker's does an awesome thing. We're going to do our thing. And this is the differentiator. It's not just local or whatever. Ann found a quote from the writer Wendell Berry, and he said, eating is an agricultural act. And she said, and we like to expand on that and say drinking is also an agricultural act. And I thought, she's genius. This is why, you know, she's the one with the brains. And so, you know, it just really sums it up. And everything we do is an exploration of flavor and directly related to that agriculture. That's, I mean, it's pretty, that's a high wire. That is, so people look at all the things we do, the agricole or the peach brandy or the watermelon brandy or whatever it is, and they're like, you know, you did, you know, are you ADD or what here, you know? And it's like, no, we're, you know, we're curious about that direct relationship between agriculture and flavor and what that expression is going to be. So we've played around, like, for instance, every year we did watermelon, we used a different variety of melon, and we end up with a different flavor every time, which we think is cool. So we have a whole library of all the watermelon brandies for 5 years. At some point, we're going to do this really cool tasting at the distillery where we'll do a vertical, which I think, you know, for a select few will be very fun.
Insane.
Or you know, our agricole. And we did a terroir experiment one year. There again, Wayne Curtis and I were talking about it. And I said, wouldn't it be cool to take cane from down near a brackish river? The Ashepoo River is down here on the Ace Basin, and take some cane from the PD. Both are blue ribbon cane, same variety. Ferment, distill, bottle them separately. We did that.
I got to cut you off for one quick second, Scott. Are you cool with hanging out for a little bit longer?
Yeah.
Okay. We got to let Ben go. He got tied up with another show we were doing for another channel, but he's the one who knows about all the stuff we sent them. So Ben's going to probably have to take off because they're waiting for him. But if you're cool, we'll finish up, and we still have some more questions for you, if that's okay.
Cool. Of course.
This has been phenomenal. I mean, for me, being from South Carolina here, love what you guys are doing. I want to have you back on because I've got a million questions for you. Just all the stuff you've dove into, because it's just absolutely fantastic. And thanks so much.
Yeah, come.
And back. I just want to say, I've been sitting here sipping this batch 19 of the Jimmy Red, and it's absolutely unbelievable. There's so much fruit, and there's just some amazing things going on it. And it's a testimony to me of what heirloom grain is all about, heirloom corn, because, you know, all the big guys and everybody, honestly, since Prohibition, yellow dent number 2, everybody's using it. And you talked about the flavoring grains. You got to use the flavoring grains, and it's got to age in a barrel for 8 to 10 years before it's good. Well, what you guys in craft are doing, especially with these heirloom corn varietals, are showing that the grain can come through and the corn itself can come through and provide these amazing flavors that don't need 10 years in a barrel. And you don't need rye. You don't need all these other flavoring grains to do it. I mean, between what you're doing and Iron Root and Wood Hat Distillery and Spirits of French Lick and others with these grain forward profiles, they're stellar. They're amazing.
No, yeah, as a whiskey drinker, I'm very excited to go to the whiskey shelf and taste these other guys' products. I mean, because, you know, I get pretty bored with my own stuff, you know, and, and we work, it is work, you know, for us, we're tasting our own things. And you're right, batch 19 is hopefully better than batch 12. And people will be like, yeah, I've had that. It wasn't, you know, it was only 2 years old and it wasn't that good, or it was, you know, it was a little young or whatever. It's like, yeah, well, try batch 19 or wait until batch 23. Hopefully we get better is what happens. You know, we didn't really know what we were doing at batch 2 or 3. Batch 19 also has gotten a little more intricate. Our blending has gotten better.
When we had Wyoming whiskey on, and Dave was very honest about the first couple barrels, he was like, we're kind of pressured to come out early, and we were only tasting our own stuff, and we thought we needed a year, but we didn't know that at the time, and so you see the progression, how things go over years, and what you all start to take in, and how it all starts to factor in.
Yeah,
so that's awesome.
Yeah, no.
Cheers, everybody.
Yeah.
And
All right,
Cheers, Ben.
thanks, man. All right.
So I got a question about your brandies. So, because that's one thing that I haven't really gotten into to try and just one brandy really. Are you getting crazy with what you're going to make for brandies? Like you're getting with corns? Are you thinking of other stuff? Going, why not? Let's make a brandy out of this.
Well, we have done that. That little still affords us some kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't say, we've thought about a lot. We've joked, kind of like when you've been tasting, when we tasted through barrels, after about 40 barrels, you start really coming up with some silly ideas. But even if you're spitting, it still gets in your tongue or whatever at 9 a.m. in the morning. No, we've distilled tomatoes. Made a tomato brandy, which was really interesting. John's Island is known for their tomatoes, and there again, back to that agricole, that cane that was grown near a brackish river had a brininess to it, and we've noticed it in some barrels of Jimmy Red that are grown down in that area. There'll be a brininess to the whiskey. We can taste it for sure. And we'll go through sometimes and be like, these 6 barrels are all from that area. And you can taste, it's a very specific flavor for that farm. So those tomatoes had a brininess. We did a watermelon that was grown down there. And it was basically like, putting salt on your watermelon. So it already has
that sounds awesome.
So, we put, peach was really for us the holy grail, because growing up in South Carolina, sorry, Georgia, we are the number 2 producer of peaches, and number 1 is California. Yeah. Georgia's a very distant third. There's a big argument when you go from different parts of the state. I grew up in the upstate, so Gaffney was a big peach producing area, but the Ridge, which is Ridge Springs area, the sort of the spine of the state, is where some of the more famous varieties of peaches are grown, and people covet June, July, late season peaches. Roadside stands pop up, and you can get like a peck of peaches, and there's no way to preserve that flavor. You get them, they're fresh, and it's kind of like we have soft shell crab here, and right now is soft shell crab season. You have it a week a year or 2 weeks a year, and everybody goes out and goes nuts trying to find the best soft shell dishes in town, and it's kind of fun. So there's something cool about not having it all the time. So peaches were that for us, and when you look at old recipes like Jerry Thomas, the original julep was made with peach brandy, not bourbon. So we were like, wouldn't it be cool to resurrect, a true peach brandy from peaches, not from juice, not from, frozen concentrate or whatever. So we worked with one of the largest peach growers in the country. He's the largest east of the Mississippi, in Ridge Springs, and Titan Farms, and he fills like 70 trucks, 18-wheelers a day. So he has a lot of seconds, or culls as they're known, and we knew we needed a lot of peaches. he also has this cool machinery that'll break the peach down, so he can peel it, he can chop it, he can pit it. So basically, we talked them into getting a single variety of peach, and we wanted to peel, the pit, everything. And we had met with a writer named Dave Wondrich, and Dave basically gave us the history of how true peach brandy would have been made back in the 1600s, era, and basically said peach brandy is the thing, that is the American cognac, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so we made that first year of peach brandy, we used 10,000 peaches, which yielded 2 barrels, and we used pit, peel, everything, and it was looked like butternut squash soup, sort of. It was real thick, a lot of solids in it. But we released 1 barrel of that last year, so it would have been 2 years old. Sold out very quickly. We made some juleps with it, and once you've had a julep made with that, you'll understand you would never have it with bourbon again if you had peach brandy. It is really spectacular. So we made that again the next year, and I think we, just like anything, made it better the next year. Last year we took a year off because of COVID, and then this year we'll release another 2-year-old. Then next year we'll release our first bottled and bond version of that. So to answer your question in the way I do, long roundabout way, you'd think we could just do all these different types of things, but what we like to do is refine, because there's a ton of work to be done in peaches that we haven't finished yet. So we really know, and we're dedicated to, and with our new still, we're dedicated to make more peach than we've ever made this year. We want to, basically quintuple down on that effort. And as far as other brandies, we love making the agricole, which we really think is more of a form of brandy because it's that raw cane juice versus molasses. So it's not refined, it's funky. It's got, if you've ever had agricoles, they're not like rum, like, Bacardi or Captain Morgan's. It's a acquired flavor, and, we like it because it's can be a little, funky, which I think it's like a funky wine. It's kind of a cool thing. So, but we thought about doing strawberry brandy this year. We had some farmers that had excess. We'll get farmers now that call us and say, "Hey, have you ever thought about, we've got a bunch of whatever, and we're like, maybe, and my personal favorite, I love blackberries. I'm like it's probably my favorite fruit. We were in California 3 years ago, and they were coming. It was in August, and they were just everywhere. And I was eating, and Ann was like, "God, and there's nothing like a sun-kissed, right off the vine blackberry. I mean, once it's been refrigerated, it's ruined." So anyway, maybe one of those one day. Blackberry would be pretty awesome, personally speaking.
Will you age any of your bourbon or your rye in any of the brandy barrels?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So we dumped the peach barrel and we immediately put Jimmy Red in it. So it's been in there for 5 months now.
Okay.
And we are actually talking about the Derby the other day, and we're like, nice. Maybe we pull some of this out for Derby, and so we haven't tried it. We kind of gotten, I'm very impatient. So we used to put things in a barrel, and I'd be like anxious and try it like the next month and whatever. Now we just kind of put it in a barrel and try to forget about it. Yeah. And so like there's things in the distillery that I haven't tried in 3 or 4 years, like the weeded bourbon, the Jimmy Red. I haven't tried it in years. It might be awesome. So I hope so. We'll eventually release that stuff. So like the ancestral corn that we're doing barrels of that. We will release an ancestral series of whiskeys, and the whole idea that I have is to do flasks. So like a set with Jimmy Red, and do like a little set of where you can taste them, because just buying it's not the kind of stuff that you just want a 750 of and you're just going to drink. It's like, I think people who are into it might want to, you know, it'd be kind of cool to taste some White Dog of, you know, this and that, and, you know, really be able to kind of have like a little library of sorts of your own to be able to taste with friends and stuff. And it's not about quantity. It's about, there again, just being able to taste that out of curiosity. So, you know, I think that going forward, that's probably going to be, you know, we could go wild with expressions that you guys, I sent some port finished rye to you guys. I think some tawny port.
I have a little bit of that here. So,
and I was really happy with that. It was like fruit cakey, and it fit the holidays really well. Yeah. And then we did an Oloroso sherry cask with the Jimmy Red. We thought was really nice. We just got we've got some more. We've got more of that in barrels now. We sold out of both of those pretty quickly, and we have we've played around with Madeira barrels in the past, which we're pulling back. We're going to go back around to that again. We have some there again, you know, French oak. We have some French oak barrels. We pulled basically would have been probably 2.5 loads off the old still. So our first still was a Cota. It's German, so it's 535 gallon still basically, and it would produce about 1.4 barrels a day. And then that was in that photo you threw up there.
I will bring it up. Here it is.
So it's the little one there. It looks tiny next to that other one, but that's 535. So a 2,000 liter still pot with a partial column that we can cut off plates too. So we get more of a pot. And then over there on the right, on my right, I guess it's everybody's right, but would be the new still in the new space. That's a Carl, also from Germany, and that's about 2,300 gallons, or a little over 8,000 liters. And that is as you can see, the line arm, more of that traditional pot. And then there again, a partial column that we can completely bypass and go right into the condenser, all hand hammered copper, and it's a piece of art. That ceiling is 24 feet. So that still is about 20 feet tall, roughly, just to give you some perspective there. And then the fermenters you see back there are all about 9,500 liters. So you have some headspace for your carbon dioxide and stuff like that. And we do, one thing I'll mention, we early on decided to do sweet mash as opposed to sour mash. So we don't use back set to lower the pH. So that means we, are kind of, I don't know, flirting with disaster, if you will. So we have to clean everything really well. We can't use a big open wooden tub and, hope that we don't pick up a bacteria. So we also do we played around with some yeast strains. Most of our yeasts are longer, lower temp. ale type yeast, so we'll go for a little longer. There again, thinking from that beer standpoint and using some of that thinking. Christian Krogstad, who I mentioned earlier from House Spirits, and then Matt Hoffman at Westland, both beer guys. We all sort of, and Lance Winters from St. George, same kind of thing. I don't know if you've ever had his single malt.
Yeah, it's
phenomenal. Yeah. So that's that to me is what's cool, is we can all kind of do our thing, and it's cool to see other people doing cool things, and we love knowing those guys, and we're on panels together pretty often. When you can do such things, and when we get together, it's like we've actually, Lance and Ellie, his wife, and Ann and I were talking about traveling some together around food, and just going to a place like Oaxaca and, go to some palenques and visit, and, but also just getting immersed in the whole food culture and, that flavor thing. And there again, I think we're similar personalities. There's a lot of us in this business, I think, that are more like that than chemical engineers or, I don't know, bros making whiskey or whatever, it's I think it's when I look at Scotland, and think about Jim McEwen or somebody like that, or Brooke Lottie, as a example of a company that's doing something really cool. I look at that, and there again, this is my sort of my problem, and my I think it's good and bad, let's just say, is that I always have a lot of angst, and I always want things to be better. And I look at other people that are doing fantastic things, and I'm not jealous. It's just that I'm like competitive, and I'm like, I want to do awesome things too. I want to make good things too.
I can be on that stage. What I'm putting out, I can be on that stage.
Yeah, I mean, so it's so I think when our distiller, our head distiller Chris joined us from another distillery. And he's a brandy nut. He loves brandy. He worked with Jermaine Raban for a while. And, he was like, oh man, like we could do this brandy and we could do that. And, and I said, listen, we're really sort of settling in, and we're, if anything, narrowing our focus. I said, but let's just say we applied all that experimentation to bourbon, to our bourbon and to our rye. And let's get really, really good at that, and then then we can start applying it to other things. And that's, so I think, I'm not going to say never with brandy. I think we're always going to be, I love making fruit brandies, and brandies are funky. The cool thing that we learned about alcohol in brandy especially is you put it in a bottle, and a year later it tastes completely different. It changes in the bottle. Brandies especially will change, and people don't think, there again, you think alcohol, it's just clear, it comes out, it's boring, whatever. No, you blow all these molecules apart, and then they come back together and pour out of the still, and it turns into vapor, then turns back into liquid. A lot happens, and then you blend it with some water, and water and alcohol don't, immediately bind, and then over time that stuff sort of starts to sort of morph back in, and a lot of times the flavor will pick back up, and you end up with this really crazy thing. Like we have some watermelon brandy, and I be honest, I was like, it's not very good, when we first made it, and it was funky. It was really funky, and tried it about a year later, and I'm like, wow, this is actually really good. It's turned into something that I think is super complex and super interesting. So there's a lot of learnings there for sure, and it's taught us a lot about our approach to whiskey. I think it's been good for us to do, and so yeah, we got a lot of ideas in the there again. After you have a little whiskey, you can come up with a lot of.
Yeah.
Now, there was one comment I missed before I want to spin back up. It had to do it with the growing of the corn, but I missed it. Renita was asking, do you monitor corn growing in the area and plan for it to pollinate off cycle of the others? I know you said you kind of had the little thing around it that kind of saved that, but before you had that, were you kind of working along those lines, like trying to kind of offset it a little bit?
So what we do is we stagger plant, and we'll get a lot of people there again, not growing up on a farm. People will call and go, "Hey, I heard about you from Garden and Gun, and we want to grow corn for you," or "I've got 10 acres. I wouldn't mind growing some of that stuff," or "It sounds like fun," or whatever. And what we've learned over time is that we don't want to set farms up for failure. So we've sort of got we have a protocol list of what a farm needs infrastructurally to be able to set themselves up best for success. And one of the things we like to do is find an isolated, like a lot of tree kind of surrounded, isolated farms, but also a understanding of working with open pollinated crops. So one of the things we do, if you stagger plant, so say your neighbor's going in with number 2 yellow dent corn the beginning of April, you stagger and plant 3 weeks later, pollination only happens for a couple of weeks there. So that pollen is not going to be present at the same time. So you have to do it's not just throw it in the ground, dump a bunch of chemicals on it, and you end up with a crop like you do in Iowa or Indiana or whatever, a number 2 yellow dent corn. It doesn't work like that. But that was part of our whole thing of proving out the model of, sort of the goal of being able to grow that 300 plus acres and do it well. And it's taken us, we started that first planting in 14 and here we are in 21, and it's taken us that long. And that's why I said earlier, like, people, will be like, how old is this whiskey? Well, you're going to leave any for 10 years and they haven't even tasted it. And I'm like,
right.
Well, first of all, let me just start.
Just the way you put down the glass was perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm like, there's a little more to it than that,
Yeah.
And age, don't get me wrong, age matters. But I also believe that you can get too much age on a whiskey, and especially in 110 degree heat, even at a lower entry proof. So, I feel like that over the years where we're planting, it's like we've really chose, and I don't say this like a martyr or anything, but we chose a harder path. But ultimately, it's the long game. It is the long game, and you just have to grit bite your lip whenever that's the first question out of their mouths is, "You're going to age any of this for 10 years?" You go, "All right, I'm not going to get irritated by that. I'm just going to, because ultimately the marketing has driven, and everybody's, obsessed, rightfully so, with Pappy. But it's like, it's hard to afford or find that stuff. But it's also, Julian will tell you that age is not everything. And, he is a fan of what we do. He and his wife Sissy, actually, we shared a house at an event a few years ago, And he said, tell me about, we were sitting up one night and Sissy and Ann went to bed and we were drinking some whiskey, of course, because he had a bottle of it there. I was not going to refuse that. And so we were sitting there and he says, tell me about this red corn, and tell him about it. And he says, well, send me a bottle of the White Dog. We sent it over. And then it's not like we talk a lot or anything. So I walk over, my phone has 2 missed calls and a text message from Julian, call me. And so I call him and he says, hey, got your whiskey. And I just got to say, my mind's kind of blown. And I said, oh, okay, cool. You know, he goes, what's in here, wheat or rye? And I said, well, it's 100% corn. He goes, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, we made it, you know. So he's like, all right, well, what kind of yeast are you using? Where are you coming off the still? What kind of barrel are you putting it in? What's going to be your, you know, he starts drilling me. And he's like, well, I just got to say, this stuff is really good. This White Dog is really good. So a few weeks later, he pops in the distillery and we thieved some out of we thieved some out of a barrel. And he goes, what's this, like 4 years old? And I was like, no, it's 14 months. And he goes, damn, this stuff just drinks older. He's like, what is it? He goes, it's just got this viscosity to it. There's just and he goes, it's just, you know, there's a lot going on in here for 14-month-old whiskey. Mm-hmm. And I said, yeah. And he's like, well, I got to tell you, I took your White Dog to BT, Buffalo Trace, and ran it through the lab. And we know you're doing a sweet mash. And, you know, he starts telling me, he goes, and there's no wheat or rye in here. And I said, no, I know, you know, and he goes, but I will say this distillate is really good. Good job there. And he goes, and I got to tell you, it's the best White Dog I've ever had in my life. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this makes me feel good. But his point later was, we were just on a Zoom with him a few weeks ago. We donated a barrel that, you know, and he helped us out with some of the process, but he said, you know, my grandfather was putting whiskey, the original whiskey was designed to be 5 to 7 years old. And I've had some, I mean, you guys may have had some of that from the Stitzelweller from the 60s. Mm-hmm. And it's mind-blowingly good. You know,
it's not the same. And not to be mean, but it's not the same.
Yeah, and he knows, and he's working really hard because he knows. I mean, they're determined. They're gonna. I mean, they're making good whiskey, and I think they're going to continue. And I think this year he was really happy with this year's release. So but it definitely told me. Because we shared a bottle one night with Sean Brock from that era, and he gave me the bottle. And the next morning, we were at a food festival. And the next morning, I woke up and I was just thinking about it. I was like, that's some of the best bourbon I've ever had. And it's this really cool glass decanter. And I flip over to the back, and it says aged 5 years. And I started laughing. I'm like, no one would even put that on the bottle these days. Yeah. You know, aged 5 years. It's like, people would be like, that's shit, 5 years, you know? It's like, so I, you know, I told him later, I'm like, I know the answer to this, but do you think it got better in the bottle or what? Because it's really good for 5-year-old. I mean, like, and he goes, no, we've got some from that era, 5 to 7 years old, and it blows away our 15-year-old. Mm-hmm. And it just, you know, it has to do with the quality of the water, the quality of the mash, the quality of the fermentation, the quality of the distillation, the quality of the barrels, the quality of the grain. You know, there are 1,000 variables, and there again, this is why for us, you know, like our experimentation is kind of endless and also very frustrating because you know, it can just go on. I mean, we're going to drive ourselves mad just, you know,
But at least there's a science to it, the way you're doing it. There is a breakdown, like you said. It's just not all willy nilly. Like I went into a field and I found this, and we're going to try it. Like there is a science to the way you're breaking it down, and that's what I love about it, is that it's taking all that, but also like bringing it to another level. Trying to, like you said, just trying to overlay the different corn varietals and see where they overlapped. And I'm sure you're already thinking of trying to play with that in a whole nother realm, because I know I did when you said it.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, the thing is that what has been great is hearing what you guys were saying earlier, and people getting it, and that keeps us wanting to do. That's positive reinforcement, and seeing other people doing good work and turning out a 3-year-old crazy good whiskey there again. And you're like, and it's like, it's not just an award winner or whatever, it's actually, consistently people are saying, no, this is a really good bottle. And that's really encouraging. And I think, there again, as a whiskey person, I'm excited because I love trying, I love like Willet rye. When Drew started making his own rye, I mean, he was famous for a lot of that early stuff that was sourced, the Bardstown and stuff like that. It was, some of the older 23-year-old Willet and stuff, which was awesome. But when he started making his own there, and I tried some of the 2-year-old rye, and I was like, whoa, this is like a crazy different rye. I've not had a rye like this before. That's the whole point. I don't want to try. We don't need another Wild Turkey rye. There already is one, and they do just fine with that rye. Right. We don't need that, so and MGP does an awesome job with their rye program, but it is what it is, and, I like a shelf that's diverse, much like I like diverse wines. Sometimes I feel like drinking a funky orange wine, and sometimes I feel like drinking a Pinot Noir, or from Willamette Valley, or a Bordeaux from France, or whatever it is, Burgundy, or whatever it is. So I think that's where we're kind of always tell people we're finally recovering from prohibition. We're recovering. It's like we're finally. Because just think about what would be if that hadn't happened. Because it got down to 6 distilleries.
Yeah, we were having a discussion about that a few weeks ago, about how that was maybe one of the most crippling things to flavor, was that, and a little bit of the industrialization that happened. But I mean, like that whole section, you have people now just going back to research some of the recipes and finding out things that had happened, and applying it and coming out with fantastic stuff. That's what I'm loving, is everyone going back, pulling stuff forward, and being like, just like you said, well, imagine if this never stopped and we were at a 25-year-old version of this, or or like you said, could have been better at a 5 to 7. But I mean, like, that would be there. So we're usually talking about, and I know I do, is like right now America is in kind of a whiskey renaissance compared to before. Like you said, you're finally breaking out of prohibition and you're stepping onto your own, where not only the really big guys have great stuff, but a whole bunch of the craft distilleries have fantastic stuff too. Doesn't have to be the 5-10-year-old, as long as a lot of people have been on. Some of the best stuff has been between 2 and 5 that we have tasted. And hell, we got surprised by like an 8-month-old last week. So there's some weird stuff out there that will pull you, and we just love how the flavor impact is coming back in our mind.
Yeah. Well, I look at it like, they're again coming from that food side, where you look at chocolate, or you look at beer, you look at cheese, you look at bread, all those, in coming from, especially from the organic, natural side of things. Organic early on meant that it sort of tasted like cardboard, and now, organic is like super premium, and it's, if you get an organic fresh chicken, it's not like any other chicken you've had. So it's that same idea. I learned a lot from Ben and Jerry's, where down here Breyers was king. Breyers, not Dryers. Breyers ice cream was, everybody thought was the best. And my favorite thing in the world was to take a half, I guess it was a half gallon of their ice cream, Breyers, and put it on a scale and take a pint of Ben and Jerry's and the Ben and Jerry's weighed as much as that half gallon. You're paying for air. You're not getting, and this has got real vanilla, and it's got real, so you look at that business and what, like a Haagen-Dazs or even going back old school, saying Fruzenglage or Ben and Jerry's did to the ice cream business. And now you look at like Jenny's with all her funky flavors, and there's tons of those little ice cream manufacturers all around, and it's happening. I think it's real, and it really is a cool thing to see in a business like whiskey, and I'm excited. And we went to a World Whiskey Forum last February in Seattle at Westland, where there were whiskey makers from all over the world. And I did a talk. I was the last talk of the whole series. And basically my whole thing was like the future of American whiskey. And I said, the future looks bright. It's really exciting. We're just on the cusp. I think, the next 10 years are going to be an explosion of really cool offerings, and it's a fun business to be in, and at the end of the day was right. We're better off in this business than we would have been in beer. I think we would have made great beer, but I think we would have been a me too, whereas in this business we can sort of stand on our own, and there again, not be a maker's mark. Nothing wrong with maker's mark, but we don't need to do what they do. We can be high wire. So it's been fun.
All right. Now we have had you on for almost an hour and 45 minutes. And I have just one more quick question to let you go. And we would love to have you on again, because like Ben said, obviously we haven't cleared it. We didn't even get into drinking your whiskey and tasting it with you tonight. We drank it, but we didn't really talk about it too much. But you are doing some fantastic work with the legislature. Could I steal like 5 minutes so everyone here can know what you're doing with South Carolina? Because you're one of the people fighting for laws to change up front, right on the lines with you and your wife.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm going to back up and go national here for a second. And we joined the ACSA, the American Craft Spirits Association. And when I first joined, it was sort of a, cool thing to be able to get around other distilleries our size and just sort of network and stuff. But early on, they were talking about legislation to lower the FET, the federal excise tax. And I thought, that's never going to happen. That's crazy. And I joined the legislative committee, and we were on calls every Friday, and I would listen to the lobbyists, and it started to get more and more and more serious. And all of a sudden there were more and more and more legislators signing on, and we became one of the most co-sponsored bills on the Hill. And I was like, this is amazing, this little groundswell. Now, craft beer was in there, wine, and us. So it was across all those platforms. So there were a lot of other people working on it. But what was really cool was there was a guy, Senator Rob Portman from Ohio, came to the distillery and said, his son was in and brought him in. And he said, hey, let me know if I can ever do anything for you guys. And at that point I thought, yeah, he's a politician. He's just saying this. It's nice, very nice of you to say that, but you're never going to be able to do anything for me in DC or whatever, because I'm just, cynical that they don't listen to normal people or whatever. And
you sound too much like us. That's fair.
and so here we are, like a year later, and they said, we're looking at the finance committee, and we need, we're trying to push this, FET, and who do we know? Portman is on this finance committee. And I said, well, I know this guy sort of, and I could reach out, and he said he would do something, for us. I reached out to him, and sure enough, he inserted our reduction into the bill as a temporary relief for 2 years in 17, and it passed. And we got 2 years, and then got him on the phone again. We got another year, and then there again, this was just my effort. There were a lot of other efforts, and so I'm not like saying I did this. It was like there were a lot of other parts to this, but it was just cool to be part of a group of like-minded entrepreneurs talking to legislators, and it made a difference. It's not like you have to come up with some lame brain idea and they'll just listen to you and pass it or whatever. It was like, they understood, and there was a lot of good lobbying and a lot of good information there. But it just sort of, as we started to think about legislation in South Carolina, I said, we just need to start calling people. We just need to start, putting the information out there, and we can do this. And so it was a fledgling group at that point. We were really not even formed as a guild. And they said, one of the guys said, we want to nominate you as president of the group. So Ann said, you can't do this unless it is going to really, move things forward, or whatever for the company. And one of the things that definitely moves things forward in the alcohol business is changing laws, because they're antiquated. Mm-hmm. So I said, I would do this, but I love hanging out with you guys and getting together, but sitting around tasting each other's whiskey and talking about it is not going to change the world for us. We need to be changing laws. And so we said, what would those laws be? We did a very small ask that first time around, and we got a few fans. I went up to the State House, walked around, met with the legislators, really just told them my story, and we passed in a miraculous way, because we didn't really have a lobby. We passed that legislation. This time around, it's a little bit more ambitious. We're trying to get parity with the breweries, so the breweries in the state can serve food. They can stay open after 7. They can, have beer, wine. They can get a full bar with liquor. And I'm like, a brewery down the street can get a full bar serving liquor, and we can't even serve our own stuff after 7 and can't serve but 3 ounces and all this. So our bill is just, we're calling it the Parity Act. And we have over 21 senators that have signed on out of the 46. We've got a lot of fans. We've made a lot of headway. You never know until the finish line, which is going to be in late May, where we're going to land. But as of right now, we're cautiously optimistic. I feel, this is a 2-year session, so I feel like we can at least get it through the Senate and then go back at the House next year, or we might get lucky and get through the whole thing. What we were doing today was a lot of this with stakeholders and legal counsel and stuff like that. It's a lot of work, but it is rewarding. And, we've gotten to be friends with a lot of the other distillers in the state, and it sort of has formed a friendship, with those guys, and I do it selfishly because I want Highwire to do better, but I also kind of love the whole idealistically that we can talk to these legislators and they may listen, and that should be the American way. And we,
I'll say it puts a little faith in the system again when you start seeing stuff work like that.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I'll be honest, we've had more go our way. We've seen bureaucracy. We've seen, we've seen the other side of it. But I would say that's the exception more than the rule. We've seen it go more. And believe me, I'm a bulldog. I can be stubborn and very direct, and basically sometimes maybe overstep things a bit whenever I'm kind of irritated or what, kick a few trash cans over or toss the desk or pitch a little temper tantrum or whatever. But ultimately, I think that I think that what I have found is, as long as you don't go overboard, they understand that you're passionate and that you care about your business, and you're going to get a little direct about that. And especially, we all pitched in, I guess 9 of us in this, there's 29 distilleries, and 9 of us in the state made hand sanitizer when there was none to be found. And a lot of us donated a lot of it. And, my whole thing now is, you knew where to turn when you needed us. And now we're asking for you to help us out. And, we're being treated like liquor stores, but you didn't turn to the liquor stores to get hand sanitizer, and so it's, it's been a good thing. And I believe in the system a little bit more, and I do believe the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So we'll get there. I mean,
but we appreciate the effort you're doing, because there are a lot of states that have very almost draconian laws that are just useless in today's world. Well, and you're explaining favors, like you said with the beer, like it's not 40%, but you have a couple 14% beers, and you're in the same damn state you were in, probably quicker. So that's what you're really worried about, but you're hindering what we feel are tourist stops. We think distilleries are clearly becoming that way, and you're hindering that from happening. Like, basically, a lot of states are switching over to a little bit more service industry. So why hinder the people that are in that field from becoming prosperous? It just doesn't make sense.
Well, you're right. I mean, when people travel, I know, especially for Ann and myself, we're traveling to get an experience. We're not traveling to go see cookie cutter type operations. If we're in, like when we went to Grenada, the island of Grenada, and we took an agro-tourist trip, and we went to a place making, growing cacao and, making chocolate, and, we want the nutmeg place where they process nutmeg. Same thing when you go to Kentucky or when you go to wine country, you don't go to the winery to get drunk. You're going there for the experience and to, have a vacation, and enjoy the area. And the wine really tells a story about the area. And I think we've done a good job in relating that agricultural piece and that uniqueness around, like, especially for the Jimmy Red, in telling our story, and people want to come and experience it and see where it's made. They're not looking to just buy bottles. I mean, they can do that, but ultimately they don't visit us. That's not why they're there. And that's been, that's our second talking point. Parity is first with the breweries. Second is agro-tourism and that experience. And I think you're right. I think we cannot serve food right now. It's illegal. And I'm like, that is counter to responsibility. We should be able to serve a something, you know. You know, we're not looking to be a full-on restaurant, but it'd be nice to be able to have I mean, I'm not a small person, but if I drink 2 cocktails and don't have any food at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I definitely do not need to be even riding a bike, you know, and there needs to be a little snack or something like that. And it also is just a better experience. You know, there's nothing worse than wanting some food and you kind of know you need it. And you're like being told, no, we can't serve you food. It's illegal. It's like, well, why? That's, you know, so, and that really has sort of stunned the legislators. They're like, we need to fix that, you know? I mean, so, and that gets even even folks who have moral objections or whatever totally agree with that, you know? So, I mean, I think that we'll get there. I mean, and we're seeing it across the country. I mean, and I think people are realizing that we're creating, you know, good additions to the community. And the beautiful thing is you've got things like wineries or breweries that you can point to now. We are sort of the last bastion, being spirits from prohibition, but being able to say, just like a brewery, you know, you don't see that being like some college frat party. You know, it's a good place. You take your dog and get a burger and have a beer and hang out with your friends or whatever, but it's not like a, you know, Fort Lauderdale, you know, on spring break, you know what I mean? Not to throw Fort Lauderdale under the bus here.
Spring break for whiskey drinkers.
Yeah, exactly.
You did say you thought the distillery was boring that first time you arrived.
Exactly. I was hoping for Fort Lauderdale. So no, I mean, you know, it's been in the news obviously lately, but it's definitely like, you know, none of our products are cheap, so it doesn't attract that type of, you know, it's tends to be sort of your wine crowd, you know, people who are looking for that culinary. And Charleston is very much a culinary town, so I think we fit into the landscape here pretty well. So yeah, hopefully being able to change some laws will be good for us and our survival and all that. And post-COVID, man, and post moving into that new building, we didn't even get to that, but we moved in February of last year, right in time to get slapped in the face with COVID. And it was a doubly hard year for us. But
I know we sent someone to see you like the week you were moving. Someone knew was like, "Oh, I'm going up there." I was like, "You can go up there, but they're in the middle of moving from one place to the other, so you should at least call before you go up there." And I think Eli still went and he picked up a bottle and stuff and got to see the old place. So
good. Well, we tried to. I think we did a pretty decent job, but we felt bad for those folks that were dropping in the middle of that. We pulled it off in about 10 days, which was pretty amazing, but it was bloody, you know. But yeah, we thought we were going to take a vacation at the end of March last year. We were like, as soon as this is over, we're going on vacation. That obviously, we got a real long vacation, just not the kind we wanted.
Well, like we're coming up on 2 hours, and we know you're busy, and you're an hour ahead, and you got to get up early. So we'll probably cut it there on you. If you want to stick on for a couple minutes after we get off the stream, Mike and I might have 1 or 2 questions.
Sure.
So, but everyone in the chat who's left, thank you for stopping in and sticking with us and learning all this great information. Next week, we are having Eli Cook on. He's actually the one who stopped out at your distillery. He sent us some blind samples, so we're going to have a little blind taste test and see how good we are at it. And I know there's a hidden Longmore 16, the old version in there, so that'll probably happen next week too. And I saw Mark was in the chat from Stillet and from Silver Fox. We'll be having a show with him coming up in April, so watch out for that one because that'll be fun too. So
I think everyone else, we will probably see you next Monday night. What was it? I missed a question. We're not going to go back because otherwise we're going to be another 15 minutes. I know it because I know Mike and I we could go like another hour, but that is not fair.
Easily,
It's fair to you. I know. Or Ann at this point.
Anne's gone. She's in bed. So.
All right, everyone. Remember, it's not the size of the den; it's the love of whiskey. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3.